So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan, Saltwater Junkie here again. In this video, I'm actually replacing the water pump for my Bubble Magus Curve 9 protein skimmer. Now this is an older unit, but it's worked perfectly fine for years. And the pump finally took a crap on me and I had to buy a new one. So right here is basically what happened with my protein skimmer. The pump is plugged in and running right now. You can hear that the pump is turning, but there's no water movement whatsoever. I found one online from Aqua Cave for right around 120 bucks. I was tempted to just try and find the impeller because that would be a lot cheaper because the actual inside of my water pump seemed like it was still in good shape. However, I needed to get this skimmer up and running as soon as possible, and buying the entire pump was the fastest way for me to do that. I still might try and get the impeller separate and have it for a spare pump for this skimmer, or use it on another skimmer that I lost the pump on, so I have a complete protein skimmer as a spare, because obviously I wasn't prepared enough for something like this happening to me, because I did end up running this system without a protein skimmer for about 5 days. Now that wasn't that big of a deal because I don't have that crazy of a bio load in this 125 gallon. So my parameters for that system stayed pretty stable. However, if there was a lot bigger bio load, it could have been a lot bigger problem than what it ended up being. So that's just something to think about. Do you have spare or backup items in case something fails in the middle of a holiday weekend? So you can get your system back up and running, and that goes for your return pump, protein skimmer pump, heaters, etc. I try to have a backup for every aspect of my system on hand at all times. I run 2 heaters just in case one fails. The other one is going to keep up with that system. I run 2 return pumps on each one of my main systems for the same reason. So one of the best things that I've ever done in this hobby as far as protein skimmers go is I changed out from using the collection cup to a remote collection reservoir, and I also made a safety shutdown that shuts the skimmer down in case that collection cup gets overfilled. And that icon for that video will be at the end of this one if you want to check it out, along with a couple others. The main reason that I try and keep a backup for every aspect of my system is because years ago on this 125 gallon system, I had my little giant external return pump fail on a holiday. And since it was a holiday, I couldn't go to the aquatic store and get another pump at that time. I did have a spare return pump that was submersible, but I didn't have it set up properly, so it was a quick change out. So it took me a couple hours to rig something up to get that system up and running again, and that's just not something I'm willing to have happen to me again. Granted, that's before Amazon really became big, so it might not be that big of an issue these days. However, the main point of this video is changing out a protein skimmer pump in this Bubble Magus Curve 9, so let's get to it. So right here I'm just loosening the 4 bolts that hold the main part of the protein skimmer housing to the base plate. You don't have to loosen them off all the way, just enough to flip out the red plastic tabs away from the edge of the protein skimmer. You will need to remove the venturi from the pump. Just giving that a little twist back and forth while you pull, it should pop right out of there. Once doing that, the main housing of the protein skimmer should lift off of the pump and the base. You might have to angle it a little bit to get it around the bubble plate and body. Once removing that, I thought I had found why my pump had taken a crap. The actual cover that holds the pump together was very loose. However, I don't think that had anything to do with the pump failing, and I'll explain why later in this video. I unthreaded the plastic bolt that held the bubble cover in place. Once removing the cover, I was able to see pieces of the impeller that had come apart and gotten stuck underneath the cover. I unthreaded the adapter that screwed into the pump that held the bubble plate in place. Now, even though that cover was loose, you'll notice that I had to use a pair of pliers in order to remove the lower part of the pump off of there, so I don't think that cover being loose had anything to do with the failure. What I did find inside my pump that did cause the problem with the impeller was a piece of K1 live bed filter media, and I haven't used that stuff in a couple of years, so I have no idea where it came from. But that rattling around inside my pump is most likely what took out the impeller. Once realizing I needed to get either an impeller or a pump, I just snapped a picture of what was on the back of this pump. Right here you can see that the date on this pump was December of 2013. Now, I did buy this protein skimmer used, but I've been running it for 5+ years, I would guess, without any problems with it at all, so I can't complain. To find this pump, all I did was Google search Bubble Magus Curve 9 SP4000 replacement pump, and it came right up. The only reason I went with the one from AquaCave, even though there was some that were a little cheaper, is because I saw positive reviews for aquacave.com online, so I didn't feel like I was going to get scammed. At first I did get a little nervous because after filling it in online and paying for it, it took about 24 hours to get a response from aquacave.com saying it was shipping. However, it did arrive on time and with no other issues. Once we received the pump and I matched it up to make sure everything was the same, I removed the 4 plastic bolts that held the pump to the base plate of the skimmer. In order to remove the bracket that holds the pump to the base plate, there is a plastic tab that you have to depress, and then that bracket will slide off of the pump. Then you just slide that bracket onto the new pump and it should snap into place. When setting the new pump onto the base plate, look for the groove that is notched out for the power cord to make sure you have the pump timed correctly on the base plate. Then go ahead and put the 4 plastic bolts back in place and tighten those down to hold the pump in place. Thread the adapter fitting into the pump to hold the bubble plate in place. Then set the bubble cover in place and use the plastic bolt that holds it and thread it into the bubble plate. When installing that cover, there is an area that does not have holes in it. Make sure you put that right above the pump discharge port. If you don't do that, you might get a lot of bubbles right in one area of the skimmer instead of even distribution of the bubbles throughout the entire skimmer. Then go and grab your protein skimmer housing and set it over the top, once again angling it to get it around the bubble plate. You might have to rotate the plate on the pump in order to line up the housing correctly with the base plate of the skimmer. To make sure you are timed correctly, just line up the hole in the skimmer housing with the suction port on the pump. Then go ahead and slide your venturi into place into the pump. I made sure the plastic bolt was tight that held the bubble cover in place on the plate, since I had to kind of move it while I was lining up the housing. Flipped around the 4 plastic tabs that hold the housing to the base plate and tightened down the bolts. It might be helpful to lift the skimmer where the power cord goes through the bottom of the base plate to make it so the housing sits flatter while you tighten down the bolts. When I was loosening the 1 plastic bolt to remove the housing, it did feel a little funny, and when I went to tighten that one back down, it did snap the head off of it. I was able to use a pair of pliers to finish removing the rest of the broken off bolt, and then it was a fine thread and I didn't have anything matching that thread pitch, so I just grabbed a little smaller plastic bolt, started it through the bottom of the protein skimmer, and then used a plastic wing nut to give me the clamping force to hold that red plastic tab to hold the housing in place. Once I had the skimmer all put together, all that was left to do was go ahead and throw it back in the sump and go ahead and make the adjustment. As far as making the adjustment on this Curve 9, I always start out with a low water level and let it go ahead and run for a couple hours, look at it, see where that level of the bubbles is coming up to. If it's not creating anything in the collection cup, I slowly raise the water level until it's producing a good amount of skimming. You don't want to start out with too high of a setting because you might overactivate and just end up dumping and filling your cup immediately. So I did hang on to the old pump once again because I do think the inner housing and the main part of the pump is still okay, and I want to have it for spare parts or possibly get another protein skimmer pump up and running so I have a spare. I did hang on to all that stuff and package it away. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.